Welcome back to the Maloney's Coasters YouTube channel, where today we are talking about Steel Taipan at Dreamworld. It's the park's biggest ever roller coaster, but does it live up to that name? And is it even good enough to be the poster child for the park? We're going to find out today as we put Steel Taipan under the microscope. Sit back and relax, click that like and subscribe button, and let's talk about Dreamworld's 2021 Mark launch coaster. Before we start, a big thank you to the Keith Monorail Army, including Generals Scaretastic YT and Rowan McMaster. Click the join button down below to become a member today. Today's roller coaster under the microscope is Steel Taipan, a Mark Rides Blue Fire launch coaster opened in 2021 at Dreamworld on the Gold Coast, Australia. It stands 39 metres tall, 1,200 metres of track, a top speed of 105 kilometres an hour, and 4 inversions, including a vertical loop, twisted horseshoe roll, and inline twist. It features a bank angle of 94 degrees and exerts a positive G-force of 3.8. First, let's talk a little bit about the ride's theming. The theming was done by a company called Picoplay, who have worked with Dreamworld and Movie World, as well as a bunch of other parks in Southeast Asia on a series of different themed lands. They also did Super Nintendo World at Universal Studios Japan, so they're very, very good at theming and themed lands and precincts. Steel Taipan looks very good, but the theming is kind of minimal. It's basically supposed to be themed to a taipan, a species of snake that exists in Australia, particularly in the outback. The inland taipan, I believe, is one of the most venomous snakes in the world. And they've gone with this outback aesthetic, which fits with the orange color scheme of the track. The downside of this aesthetic is that it doesn't lend itself to shade very well. There's not really any species of tree, for example, that would fit in with an Australian outback aesthetic, because trees don't really grow out there in the outback. And as a result, a lot of this kind of area outside the Steel Taipan entrance, it's just a big concrete bed that just gets absolutely sizzling hot. But it does look good. I really think that the area looks quite good for the level of theming that they went for. I particularly like the design of the queue. It is designed in the shape of a snake skeleton with the shade sails and the shade sail structure. I think that's really clever. I like that a lot. I think it looks very good. But again, there's not a whole lot of theming really going on here. Definitely stylizing, and it looks great. But it's not really what I would describe as a themed ride. Particularly when you get to the station, again, there's some nice little touches like the color scheme and the way that things are patterned and that sort of thing, but you're not really looking at a themed ride here. It is, at the end of the day, a very functional station. The station's quite basic, but it's functional. It does the job. It reminds me a little bit of what Movie World did down the road with DC Rivals. There's some elements that look nice, but at the end of the day, they were more focused on function than form. But it looks fine. Preloading is a little bit interesting here. So the queue leads directly into a large area outside of the air gates, where several trains worth of people at a time are told to stand on spots for each row, and then we'll move up gradually towards the air gates, kind of just to make sure that there's a few trains preloaded and ready to go. And in theory, that works really well, but I think it can get quite confusing just because of the way the layout of the station is made. So because the queue enters at the side of the station that is the rear of the train, there's a lot of pushing and shoving past people to get to your spot in the preloading section if you are, say, towards the front of the train. Or sometimes people get a little bit confused about how the spots kind of work, and they end up standing in the wrong place, and it just throws everything completely out the window. When preloading is done well, it works, it speeds up the operations, and I like the initiative being taken to encourage staff to have several trains worth of people preloaded, because in theory that means that when it comes to time to load and dispatch, that speeds things up because people know where they're supposed to be going. But yeah, just the design of the station does make it a little bit confusing sometimes. It can definitely be a big, excuse the term, clusterfuck of people just standing in the preloading section there. So the train is a basic Mark launch coaster train. It's the same as what you'll generally find on all of their other launch coasters, as well as quite similar to the ones that you find on like their hyper coasters and their mega coasters and stuff like that as well. You know, it'll look very familiar to you if you've ridden DC Rivals just down the road. The major difference between Steel Taipan's trains and the ones that you find on Blue Fire or any other Mark launch coaster that you happen to have ridden is that the lap bars include an added seatbelt. This is something that the park has done by choice. Movie World also did it just down the road with DC Rivals. It's just an added, you know, visual safety feature, I suppose. This does slow down the operations because Dreamworld have a policy that guests don't do up the seatbelt. The seatbelt has to be done by the ride attendants. So it can slow things down a little bit, but you know, it's fine. They're still just as comfortable as the regular Mark lap bars, so you know, we put up with it. The trains do look really good. I love this snake design on the front. The eyes glow. It looks fantastic. I think they're probably one of my favorite trains in Australia at the moment. They're really, really beautiful. The other thing that kind of affects operations with Steel Taipan in terms of the train design is that they've added another safety feature to these trains, which is these little, I believe they're RFID based, these little tags that the attendants have to tap on a sensor on the side of the train in order to verify that the restraint has been checked. Now, really, this doesn't actually add anything in terms of safety. If a restraint is locked, a restraint is locked. But essentially what it does in terms of overall safety is that it slows the attendants down and forces them to physically verify that they have checked a restraint. You know, when you're under pressure, you've got a long queue and people are getting a bit antsy, maybe there's been some rude customers or whatever, there can be this urge or this desire to do things faster. And when you try to do things faster, sometimes that means that you rush and you're more likely to make mistakes. So the idea is it's just an extra step per seat that the attendant has to think about. They have to physically tap that RFID tag and get a green light. And that really forces them to just slow down and make sure that they are actually saying, yes, I have checked this restraint. There should be no excuse for anything really to get missed. So the operations on Steel Taipan can be quite slow. When they're running two trains, it's okay, it's acceptable, but they do tend to stack quite often. Just because of those added safety features and a few policies like not opening the air gates until the platform is clear, etc. It's your typical Australian overzealousness when it comes to safety compared to the rest of the world, which I think particularly in Dreamworld's case is totally understandable. So let's talk a little bit about the layout. Once you dispatch, you head 180 degrees around to the left, and if you have ridden Blue Fire at Europa Park or any of the other clones of that ride, you'll be very familiar with all of this layout except for the first bit. So instead of just going into the launch track and launching straight into the layout, Steel Taipan features a switch track and a swing launch. So instead of just launching once straight into the layout, you launch forwards, then backwards, then forwards again, and there is an added twisted spike to accommodate that backwards launch. So as a result, I find that the swing launch is just a little bit slow. Particularly the first launch, it's very Mark rides, like it just doesn't do much at all. But that's fine. The reverse launch is good. You get a little bit of a kick from it. And then actually going up that reverse spike, it's super powerful. There's a real blast of positive G-force. I actually think it's one of the best moments of the ride. You really get blasted with the positive Gs once you hit the bottom of that spike and curve upwards, and then a good amount of float as you stall at the top of the spike. Particularly if you are in these spinning tail whip seats, you get right up really, really high on that spike, and of course you'll be spinning at the same time. It's a great moment. And then of course you roll forwards, and into the launch for the third and final time when you are launched to the top speed of 105 kilometers an hour. Now, there is a little bit of a design quirk with this launch track, which is that, and I'm not 100% sure if this is the case on the single launch Blue Fire clones as well, but there is a long gap between when the LSM fins end and the beginning of the first element, this overbank, begins. So there's this big long section of straight track, and that's really noticeable on two occasions. First of all, it's very, very noticeable when you roll backwards from the first launch into the backwards launch. There's just this big long pause of kind of just coasting backwards on straight track before the second launch kicks in. And then, of course, after the third launch, you sort of just coast for a second. There's just this little tiny dead spot. And I do think that sometimes, it varies, but sometimes I think that straight track can result in just a little bit of speed bleeding off, and I find that Steel Taipan can be a little weak. It depends on how it's running. My last couple of visits, I've found it's been running really, really well, so that hasn't been a problem. But occasionally, I do think just because that straight track exists, you just lose that tiny little bit of speed, and that's enough to affect how forceful and well-paced the rest of the layout feels. So, it depends. It's temperamental. It can be a little bit moody. So that you launch the third time straight into the first element, which is this big overbank. I actually don't think it's accurate to call it an overbank. I think the bank angle is listed as 94 degrees, although I think that might be referring to the overbank turn after the loop. This overbank is a weird shape. It's kind of 90-degree angles, very weird kind of angle to the turn. I'm not sure how to feel about this as an element. I don't think it does much for me, and I actually think it's kind of funky and weird. But anyway, it starts off the ride. You'll then dive down under some rockwork into your first inversion, which is the vertical loop. The vertical loop it's okay. It's just okay. It's very tall, which I think is its strongest point. The scale of it, you get a good bit of height. Sometimes in the spinning seats, you can end up being sideways or backwards, which is really, really cool. But in terms of the inversions, I actually think the loop is the weakest because it doesn't really have a whole lot of force to it. It's more about the height and the scale of that loop. So out of the loop, you do that turnaround that I mentioned before, the one that I actually do think is overbanked. I'm not 100% sure whether the 94-degree overbank is the first one or this one. But anyway, it's very whippy either way. Whips you right over to the right, and it's very good in the left-hand side because you get whipped upwards and tossed out of your seat before rising up into the mid-course brakes. Now, this is a really unexpected moment in terms of the Blue Fire layout. That turnaround, that kind of that more unbanked turn into the mid-course brakes has some really, really strong laterals, and if you're in the tail whip seats, particularly if you're riding the tail whip seats alone, this can be a moment that really starts you spinning because those laterals are very, very, very strong as you rise into the mid-course. You then dive off the mid-course, again underneath some rock work, into a double inverting element called a twisted horseshoe roll, which basically consists of a corkscrew followed by a turnaround into a corkscrew back in the other direction. These are good inversions. They're better in the spinning seats because, as I mentioned, the mid-course tends to really pick up the speed of the rotation on the tail whip seats. So they tend to be quite intense in the tail whip seats. In the normal standard forward-facing seats, they're all right inversions. They do okay. They're not groundbreaking, but they're fun. After exiting the second of the corkscrews in the twisted horseshoe roll, you enter an airtime hill that goes through the vertical loop. This airtime hill I find is very inconsistent. This is one of the moments where Steel Taipan feels its moodiest. You know, sometimes this airtime hill can hit and it's got some really nice airtime to it, and sometimes it does nothing at all. It really depends on how the ride is running on that day. This is where the ride starts to show how temperamental it can really be, and you'll either get some good airtime here or none at all. You then turn around into the final inversion, which is an inline twist, and this twist on the Blue Fire models has been nicknamed the Blue Fire Roll. This inline twist is, I would say, I don't think it's controversial to say this is the best inversion in Australia, without question. This roll is so whippy. It's incredibly whippy. It almost feels like upside down ejector airtime. You get tossed out of your seat with how sudden this inline twist is and how rapidly the train takes it. In the spinning seats, this is the moment that will take your breath away. It's absolutely astounding whatever direction you're facing and however fast you're spinning at that moment, it's crazy. The Blue Fire Roll is just insane. And from there, you'll turn around to the right into the final breaks. Overall, Steel Taipan feels like a good long ride, but it definitely has some pacing issues. As I mentioned, it can be temperamental in terms of how the pacing goes through the main layout. Kind of depends on how well that launch is going, whether you bleed off any speed in that straight track. I've had good days, I've had bad days. It can depend. And I also think there are just some dead spots that aren't particularly great, don't do much for me. That the first overbank is one of those moments. The airtime hill through the loop is one that seems to only hit sometimes. You know, it's got some dead spots, it's got some pacing issues. So looking at Steel Taipan overall, even though I think it has those pacing issues and loses some speed, I actually think the swing launch is an improvement on the standard Blue Fire launch. I think it's commonly said in the enthusiast community that mark rides are not particularly good at launches. Their LSM launches tend to be a little weak, like they pick up speed quite slowly and gradually. So they're not the manufacturer that you would go to if you wanted a launch that had real kick or real punch to it. And for that reason, I think the swing launch, you know, because you're not expecting it to have real punch to begin with, because it is supposed to just gradually pick up speed on 3 passes, you kind of get more of an experience out of it, because you get you get the backwards launch for starters, which is a different experience. You get that twisted spike, which is probably, I would say, the second best element on the ride after the inline twist. And then you get the good kick of the third launch as well. So I think it is overall an improvement. Whether the sacrifice for that is that section of straight track, meaning that sometimes it can be paced poorly, I don't know. I'm not sure. And it's been a little while since I've ridden another one of the Blue Fire clones, so I'll need to compare it the next time. Overall, the layout is okay. I like Blue Fire's layout, but it has some weaknesses, and I think the big thing that I'd want to say about it is that it's not the layout of a headlining coaster for a major park. You want something, you know, I look down the road at Movie World and SeaWorld, and I would say that both DC Rivals and Leviathan have layouts that are not only custom, so unique entirely to those parks, but they're far more perfected. I would say DC Rivals has like 1 or 2 dead spots, 1.5 really. Leviathan has none. Steel Taipan, it's very hit and miss. There are moments that I think are really, really good, and then there's a lot of just filler and slop in there. So I think that it's good. It's a good ride for the park. But right now, it's their headlining coaster. Steel Taipan is the biggest roller coaster at Dreamworld, and I think they should be aiming to do something better. I would hope that Steel Taipan could fill in kind of a number 2 slot for something else eventually. Overall, though, I think it's been a good addition for Dreamworld. It's popular, I would say rightfully so, but they do need something better. And now that they're starting to move into this new era where they're investing a lot of money into the park, they're building all of these new attractions, I would say, I hope that sometime in the future, maybe before the Olympics in 2032, that they have their eyes on doing something bigger and something better. It's good. Steel Type, do not get me wrong, Steel Taipan is a really, really good coaster. I really like it. But it's not a world-class coaster, like I would say DC Rivals or potentially even Leviathan are. I think it's popular and rightfully so, but they do need something better. And my last reflection would be that I think Tail Whip carries this ride. If they didn't have the foresight to add the spinning seats, which I think something that they probably did in response to DC Rivals backward seats, having that kind of crazy upcharge that they can use to compete there. If they didn't do that, I would say this would be a mid edition at best. Because Steel Taipan on its own is just fine. Like, it's not great. It's good, but it's not great. But Tail Whip, it's totally unparalleled. And I actually think it's better than the backward seats on DC Rivals or Leviathan. The experience is much more unpredictable. It can be seriously intense. And it's absolutely crazy. And it's my favorite thing to do at Dreamworld is the Tail Whip seats. Without a doubt, my favorite attraction at Dreamworld is the Steel Taipan Tail Whip seats. But I think that that's a bad thing, because I don't think that the best attraction at any park should be an upcharge. And that would be less of a problem if it's a DC Rivals situation, where I still say the backward seats on DC Rivals are the best thing at Movie World, but DC Rivals on its own is also just absolutely fantastic. So it's like, okay, yeah, like the best thing's an upcharge, but if I don't do it, I'm still going to have a fantastic day. With Dreamworld, I feel like, Steel Taipan on its own is just okay, whereas the Tail Whip seats are phenomenal. So I think that really the reason I'm going to give it as high a score as I am going to give it is the Tail Whip seats. That's the reason why. So before we dive into the final verdict, I want to talk a little bit about ride accessibility and restrictions. If you've listened to this review and you're thinking about riding Steel Taipan, these are the things you have to keep in mind, and I'll just give you some recommendations in terms of accessibility. So Steel Taipan has a minimum height restriction of 130 centimeters and a maximum of 200 centimeters. So this is reasonably accessible for a ride of this scale. 130 is pretty good. The mark lap bars can be a little bit difficult if you are larger around the waist. It does need to staple downwards in order to secure you, so it can be a bit restrictive, particularly if you have a larger torso or larger thighs. Dreamworld does warn that due to the restrictive nature of the harness, some riders may experience difficulty meeting those requirements. There is a test seat for Steel Taipan. It's available right at the entrance of the ride. Highly recommend using that just to save yourself the time and of course the unfortunate embarrassment that can come if the harness is too restrictive for you. The ride is not suitable for pregnant guests, guests with back or neck problems, heart conditions, high blood pressure, and you will not be allowed to ride if you have a cast or broken bone or if you've had recent surgery. It's also not recommended for guests susceptible to motion sickness. Guests who ride must be able to absorb sudden and dramatic movements and should be able to descend stairs and or ladders independently or with the assistance of a carer in the case of an evacuation. If an evacuation is going to happen, it's probably going to be from either the launch track, in which case you would be accompanied down the catwalk and down some stairs, or from the mid-course breaks or final breaks. If it's final breaks, you'll probably just be accompanied down the catwalk back into the station. If it's from the mid-course breaks, that's where it may be a little bit more difficult for those who need assistance, because the way down from that quite elevated mid-course break is a spiral staircase. So that can be a little bit more difficult. In order to ride, guests will need to remove all prosthetic limbs. They must have at least one natural upper limb that extends past the wrist and at least two natural lower limbs that extend past the ankle, and guests must be able to continuously hold on and brace with at least one natural functional arm. So for those with limb differences, you do need at least one natural functional arm and at least both of your legs naturally extending past the ankle joint. As always, any rider on any roller coaster should be able to independently maintain an upright seated position and support their head and neck for the duration of the ride. That's very, very important. And you must be able to transfer into the seat either independently or with the assistance of a carer. Staff members will not be able to assist you. The reason for that is if something happens, then the staff member, they could make a mistake in terms of assisting you, and it could result in further injury. So you need to either be able to do it independently or with the assistance of a carer who is also riding with you. In terms of accessibility, though, I would say Steel Taipan is pretty state-of-the-art. Modern roller coasters tend to be quite accommodating for coasters of this scale, particularly. But if you do have any doubts, you can see Dreamworld's Health and Accessibility Centre, which is located adjacent to this Sky Voyager entrance. So actually on your way to Steel Taipan. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the final verdict. I deem Steel Taipan to be an A-tier coaster. It's not perfect, but it is punchy, it's fun, it's a good entry-level thrill coaster, and the tail whip spinning seats are what carries the ride from probably a B tier to an A tier. They escalate the ride from being a decent thrill coaster to a truly memorable experience, and I'd highly recommend factoring them into your budget for the day. With that, Steel Taipan enters our World Roller Coaster Rankings at number 1 as our first coaster ever reviewed. Join me next Monday for the next review. I've been Maloney's Coasters. Click the like and subscribe buttons and leave a comment to help out against the YouTube algorithm, and I will see you later in the week. Happy Monday, everybody.